Hi guys, welcome back for another casual chat in the hostage loft. That is the current vibe of the channel, is casual and hostagey. But you guys really seem to be enjoying them, which is very good for my perfectionism because I can get quite hung up on things like editing and making it look the way I think it's meant to look, or saying something exactly the way that it should be said, which means you don't really end up saying anything that useful because you're so in your head about it. And so this has been really good for me, and like I said, you guys are enjoying them and I do too. So let's keep doing the creepy background in this really, really, really creepy room. Excellent. So I want to come and talk to you guys about exercise this week. It came up specifically in our recovery Q&A on Monday. If you don't know, I do a recovery Q&A live over on Instagram every Monday morning at about 9 o'clock Sydney time. We can come and ask all your questions about your recovery or recovery generally. People seem to be finding them really helpful. We had a stack of people there the last couple of weeks, more and more people joining each week. So definitely come and find me over on Instagram, What Mia Did Next, if you want to come and join. And exercise comes up a lot, and the question about exercise tends to be, how do I know that I'm ready to go back to exercising, and how do I change my relationship with exercise? How do I know that I'm using it for the right reasons? I have talked about my experience with exercise in the past when I was sick, and then through recovery documented how that was changing. And on reflection now that I've been recovered for as long as I have been, I can see that I still held some disordered beliefs, probably for longer than I was even aware of consciously at the time, about exercise. I think it was the thing that I was not in denial about, but exercise is really tricky in recovery, right? Because we don't recover and then never exercise again if we had an issue with exercise before. Just like because we had an issue with food, we don't then recover and stop eating food, your relationship with it changes. You've still got it in your life to some degree, but what is that relationship like? That's really what determines whether or not it's healthy or not, is your intention. It's the intention with which you're using food, the intention with which you're using exercise. It's not actually the thing itself, it's how you're approaching it. And I think for a long time, I probably was still using it as a means of control, as a means of compensation, as a means of, there was probably like an aesthetic thing there as well. Like, oh, well, I'm not trying to lose weight, but I'm trying to be toned. Or I'm not trying to lose weight, I'm just trying to manipulate my body shape in another way, which doesn't seem as bad because recovery is all about food, right? Like exercise doesn't play a part, but evidently it does. We know that from research, we know that clinically, we know that anecdotally. And from my personal experience, yes, that was absolutely the case for me. I, just like I have developed an intuitive relationship with food, can confidently say I now have an intuitive relationship with movement. And one of the greatest indicators of that for me was when I was overseas taking care of my dad. I didn't use any form of movement for a couple of months because it wasn't my priority. I didn't really have time to. I could have made time to do it, but it just didn't feel like it was a productive thing for me to be doing at that time, that I just had totally conflicting priorities in that area. And it caused me zero anxiety, it caused me zero concern. I didn't have any thoughts about making up for it or changing my eating habits or whatever it is. And that's what I believe is a truly intuitive relationship with exercise, that the absence of it doesn't make you feel guilty, anxious, ashamed, doesn't make you sort of calculate other ways you've got to make up for it. So that is my first recommendation, is when you are going through this recovery process and engaging with exercise, if you still are or you're reintroducing it, is to always ask yourself this question. If somebody said to you, you cannot engage in exercise for this week, how would you feel? Many clients say to me, but Mia, exercise makes me feel good. It makes me feel strong. It makes me feel productive. It makes me feel healthy. It makes me feel all these quote unquote positive things. Well, okay, when it's present, that's not where we're going to find out whether or not it's disordered. It's when we question whether or not we could handle it if it was taken away, right? If the proposition of not being able to do it brings up feelings of anxiety or guilt, or your head starts to do some calculations about what that's going to mean for your shape or your weight or your size, there's a good chance that that is coming from something a little bit disordered, and might take some time reflecting on that and being really honest with yourself about where those feelings might be coming from. So that's the first really good barometer of where you are currently with your relationship with exercise is what would happen to you and how would you feel about it if you didn't engage in it. The next big thing that I recommend for clients is to start tracking how they feel about exercise, how they feel emotionally, how they feel in the lead up, during, and after. So what I ask clients to do is to keep an exercise log, and they send it to me before our session each week for as long as we're tracking it. So what I get them to do is to write down the date and the time that they engaged in exercise, the kind of exercise they engaged in, whether it was going for a walk, which is exercise, or yoga, which is exercise. I know your eating disorder could disagree that those things are exercise, but they are. Whether it was a run, whether it was boxing, whether it was an online workout, a YouTube workout, and how long they did it for, how they felt beforehand, and what was motivating them in terms of, did it occur to them to do it because of what they'd eaten the day before? Did it occur to them to do it because they'd feel guilty if they didn't? Did they feel pressured to do it? Did they do it because it helps them to clear their mind and feel centered and feel strong and feel connected to their body? I think you can weed out of those two which one's a bit disordered and which ones aren't. How they felt during. Did they feel present? Did they feel connected? Or did they feel disconnected? Did they feel like they were in their head? Were they listening to something chaotic or a bit critical, like you need to go faster or for longer? And then how did they feel afterwards? Again, did you feel centered, connected, strong? Did you feel like you'd done something good for yourself, both mentally and physically, in terms of connecting those two parts of ourselves? Or did you feel like you hadn't done enough? Did you feel mentally exhausted, like you had just completely put yourself, at your absolute limit, and sort of might be using it as a way to numb yourself, to not just physically, but to emotionally and mentally numb yourself as well? Did it feel like you didn't do enough, or you did enough to eat the way you were going to eat that day, or to make up for what you'd eaten the day before? All of these specifics. And then the last one is to, out of a ranking of 10 being you really enjoyed this form of exercise, that you felt, again, repeating myself, but relevant, connected, centered, strong, like you'd done something good for yourself mentally and physically. So that level of enjoyment, like, yeah, I feel really positive about it. Or did you feel an enjoyment level down on the other end, say 1 out of 10, which is feeling anxious, feeling exhausted, feeling like you pushed yourself beyond your limit, feeling like you were berating and criticizing yourself. So really putting a numerical sort of ranking on all those things that we've just tracked. And even by doing that alone, guys, you will see so clearly where your relationship with exercise is sitting currently. And only when you have that oversight and that blueprint can you get really honest with yourself about what you are using exercise for, what its role is in your life, how it might be affecting your recovery. Because we can't find this free relationship with food and with our bodies and still try to manipulate our intake or our appearance or our emotions, and by that I mean numbing them, by using exercise in a disordered way. That would be like flipping it, that you have this intuitive, healthy, centering, positive relationship with movement, but you're still restricting or binging and purging or binging or whatever it is. It's kind of got to go hand in hand. They've got to move forward together and become as intuitive and as balanced and as healthy, and by healthy I mean mentally healthy, as each other, right? They're two halves of the same whole. Can't leave one behind. Then what we tend to do is start to focus on those bits of exercise that you're doing, which are a higher enjoyment level, and start to analyze what makes them enjoyable. Two of the best ways to do that is walking, and I mean slow stroll walking. I don't mean power walking. I don't mean find the most rugged, hilly, crazy incline path and then give that a go at, 10 out of 10 walking speed. I mean, go and walk through nature. Put on a podcast, not music. Make it about the time that you're spending with yourself. Make it about observing what's around you. See what's enjoyable about that. See how you feel afterwards. Do that tracking that we just talked about. Same thing with yoga. So if you're not into yoga, do the walking one. If you're not into walking, do the yoga one. or gentle stretching, or whatever it is, whatever also is physically accessible for you. So yoga is a really good one because it's all about connecting the brain and the body. It's all about those two things working in tandem, which is precisely what movement should be. That should be the feeling, that those two things are sort of as one. We spend a lot of time up here in our heads when we have eating disorders. We particularly spend a lot of time up here when we have eating disorders or a disordered relationship with food or exercise, and kind of feel disconnected and in conflict with our body. Movement should be an opportunity to reestablish and strengthen that connection between the two. And you'll know the feeling when you feel it. I know that's not terribly helpful. It's like when my mum was teaching me how to drive a manual car, and she was like, you'll just feel it. You'll just feel when the clutch and the accelerator are working. I'm like, just feel it. Feel what? I don't know what the feeling is, so I don't know. Look for it. And that's why I'm trying to be as descriptive as I can and repeating myself with some of those connected, centered, etc. words, because that's truly the feeling. If you've meditated, you'll know the feeling. Try meditating if you want to get familiar with what that might look like or feel like to you. So we want to continue to encourage the activities and the interaction with movement which produces that outcome, and weed out the activities and the movement which produces a highly anxious, manic, self-critical, disconnected outcome. Analyzing your relationship with movement in this way is an incredibly effective way of figuring out whether or not movement should have a place in your recovery currently. If you're finding that it's coming much more from a disordered angle than an ordered one, it's probably time to hit pause for a little while. There are some other reasons, really, really crucial reasons why we need to hit pause on exercise. A really important reason I want to highlight for why we put a pause on movement is if you are not medically stable. All of that tracking doesn't apply if you are somebody who is currently in a medical position where movement is unsafe for you, and that's something which you will be guided by in working with a doctor, treatment team, whomever is advising that that is just not for you at the moment. Then it's just not an option. It's a non-negotiable. In order for you to get back to a place where you can engage with exercise, your focus and attention needs to be on getting to a place where you are medically safe before you can track or evaluate or do any of that. It's just not going to be a productive use of your time, and it's also putting you at enormous risk. Working out whether or not it's the time for you to be returning to movement or engaging in movement is incredibly personal. It's medically personal, it's personal in terms of your treatment and the advice that you're receiving, it's personal emotionally, it's personal historically. It really is about a whole lot of different facets, and that's why I wanted to provide that tool and that insight that I work on with clients, because a lot of it is about being honest with yourself. A lot of it is about examining what your relationship with exercise has been previously, what you really want it to be from an ordered, healthy self place, and what it's like currently. And in doing that, that's one of your best ways of getting to where you want to be. And if instinctively you feel like you need to hit pause at different stages, that's fine. I did too. As I was waking up to the fact that my relationship with exercise was still disordered, I would hit pause for days or weeks at a time, sometimes months at a time, because it was becoming apparent that even though my relationship with movement had improved, it wasn't quite what it needed to be. And it wasn't quite in step with how intuitive and natural and balanced my relationship with food had become. That was my biggest clue, that those things were sort of out of step, that there was still an anxiety, that there was still a fear, that there was still a focus on manipulating myself physically through exercise. And I know it's tough, guys, because there's so much out there about movement and conflicting information, etc. But just like with food and the fact there's so much diet culture stuff out there and there's so much, conflicting information and advice, that's why we go back to working towards something intuitive, working towards you being your greatest source of knowledge and insight about what is good for you, what works for you, what feels good to you. And that's precisely how my relationship with exercise and food has ended up, that it is intuitive, it is enjoyable, it is strengthening, it connects everything that I need to have connected. It makes me calm. That's probably the word that I have always focused on the most in my mental health process, is that if something doesn't make me feel calm, if it's more on the chaotic end of the scale, I just don't have space for it, or I need to revisit it, because that is how I remember my eating disorder was chaos. Chaos in my head, chaos with my body, chaos with my health, chaos with my relationships, chaos with my job. I want to be calm. So if I don't feel calm at the end of how I engage with movement, then it's not the right movement for me. And finally, just an extra tip, which is not about being ready or when you should or how to work out whether or not you're ready, is to let you know this. Many of us with eating disorders who have also engaged in movement that is not good for us tend to enjoy running. That is also one of the leading causes of relapse, is engaging in running, particularly in earlier stages of treatment. So I want to leave that with you, that as you're tracking your engaging with movement and exercise, that one of our known leading contributors to relapse is running. So that's an important piece to take into how you evaluate how you're going to engage with movement in the future. Okay, just one last little tidbit. I hope that was helpful, guys. I hope that me sharing some of these insights and some of the work that I do with people one-on-one, I really come and try to give you the most effective tools that I see working across the board, because obviously my work with people is individualized. What works for one person isn't going to work for everyone, but I do see this being effective over and over and over again, and people coming back to me months later after we work together saying, my relationship with movement is by far the best work that I have done, and was some of the most impactful work that we did, because it can be enjoyable, it can be fun. Go and do things like I do, go rock climbing, go hiking with friends, go boxing, go do things that are social or new or challenging in a different way, challenging mentally, opportunities for you to engage with nature, for you to engage with the people who you love. Turn it into a totally different experience altogether, and track it and see how amazing it can be. Okay. All right, guys, I will see you over on the live next Monday. If you want to come and find me on Instagram or Twitter, you'll see me on the live on Instagram. It's not on Twitter. I'm so not helpful in these more casual videos. I'm going to change the day of videos coming out to Fridays, just because it gives me more time to sort of get them done, and then I'm not letting you down by them not coming out on Wednesday. So it's now going to be out Friday mornings, Sydney time. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a beautiful weekend. I will see you next week. In the meantime, as always, much love. Take care. Bye, guys.